Hi, I'm Dr. J, and my talk today is called The Fine Art of Not Fitting In, or Why Your Team Has Never and Will Probably Never Hire Me. So what I wanted to talk about is do a little bit about gender, what this gender thing is, tell you a little bit about my story about how I understand my gender so that we're all kind of sitting on the same page. And then I want to talk about the problem, and I'll explain it in a couple of different ways. I'm going to bring in a tiny little bit of queer theory, but don't be afraid, I'll hold your hand the whole way through. And then I'm going to talk about how we as a group can maybe start to have a look at this. So to start off with, a quick gender lesson, just so that we're all on the same page with what this is. So this is the gender binary. There are men on one side and women on the other, and people can move between it from one side to the other, or they can sit in the middle. My relationship to this gender binary, I'm not on it. I'm off somewhere trying to find a decent coffee. So how do you get there? How do you reach that point in this understanding of your gender? So I'm going to tell you my story. I was born the day the first men who walked on the moon returned to Earth. Now this is important, not because it makes me nearly 51, but because it meant that when I was a kid who felt like they didn't fit in, I explained this to myself by saying I'm an alien. Because everyone was so interested talking to those astronauts that they didn't look at the children, and that was the perfect day for the aliens to come down to change the babies for alien babies, and that made a lot of sense to me. And that's how dislocated I felt from my peers and from everybody else. So, I was born, my genitals were examined, and it was determined that I was a girl. And here we are as a very small child. My mother has dressed me in some kind of dress, and I'm obviously well impressed by this entire notion of being a girl. And here I am around 11 or 12. So even for the early 80s, this is not quite standard for a girl. I don't quite act like other girls, and I'm not quite acting like boys either. I just am quite an odd child. So I came to the UK from New Zealand in 2005, and this is important because in 2004 we had the passing of something called the Gender Recognition Act. This allowed people to identify as trans within a legal context. So the friends who I made were trans, and one of the questions that I started to look at was my journey trans? Was my journey to move from one side of the gender binary to another, or into the middle? What was my relationship to this entire idea? One of my best friends suggested that while I was trans, I wasn't transgender, I was transgressive. And this allowed me to build my own gender. So I came up with the gender transgressive, non-binary, genderqueer. Now this is my official gender. I have a statutory declaration to that effect, which I presented to the New Zealand government, and they changed the gender marker on my passport to an X. Fantastic. Really, really progressive. Self-ID for the win. Now, some people who are a bit more knowledgeable might say, non-binary, genderqueer, they're both umbrella terms, they don't quite fit together and you're mashing them together. I'm like, see the first word, move along. So how does this play out in the employment field? How does this play out when I go looking for a role? So to tell you a bit more of a tale, there was 18 weeks where I was unemployed, and I did something like 50 interviews, phone and face-to-face interviews during that time. I was looking for contract or permanent roles. I'm a good candidate. I've got lots of experience. I've worked in many places. I've worked in verticals. I've worked in horizontals. I can turn myself to 3 or 4 different types of roles. For 48 of those interviews, the answer came back, Dr. J is a great candidate. They've got really good experience and really good knowledge. I just don't think they're a culture fit for our organisation. So I am not fitting into a culture fit. Every organisation of those 50, 48 of them looked at me and said, this is somebody who's not a culture fit for our organisation. And so how does this come about and what does this mean? And you might say, well, Jay, you might think you're all that and a pack of chips, but you might not actually be that good. So I'm going to present you some actual numbers. So this is from the Harvard Business Review. So these are like real proper numbers, and you've probably seen them presented before. If you have 1 woman and 3 men, there is a 0% chance of the woman being hired. If you have 2 women and 2 men, there's a 50% chance of a woman being hired. And there are 3 women and 1 man, there's a 67% chance of being hired. Now, I think those numbers are slightly wrong, but I don't, because I don't believe the 50% and the 67%. And I want to explain a little bit about why. So first off, I want you to meet Norm. Now I'm going to take you through a tiny little bit of queer theory. It's okay, I'll hold your hand. So this is Norm. He's nothing special. He's just the societal normative on every measure. And I'll go through kind of what those are. And it's essentially what we expect. He is what we expect on every single measure. So let's have a closer look at what those are. Norm is a cis man. He's not trans. He was assigned male at birth. He grew up from a boy to a man, and he's fine with that. He's white. He's straight. He's able-bodied. He's neuronormative. This means he doesn't have dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia. He doesn't have anything like, he's not on the autism spectrum. English is his first language. He's not a carer. He has no caring responsibilities for his children nor his parents. He's middle-aged. He fits nicely in their age band, and within my kind of STEM world, that's somewhere between 30 and 45, that kind of 15 years of middle-agedness. He's got no obvious mental health issues. He doesn't suffer from anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, psychosis, nothing like that. He's middle class, so he went to a decent school. He then went on to university and got a degree or two, and he grew up in the UK. So all of those things, you're like, yeah, that sounds norm. That sounds normative. This is norm. This is norm. So let me introduce you to Norma. Norma is exactly like Norm. Everything is the same, but Norma is a cis woman. She was assigned female at birth, grew up from a girl to a woman. In every other way, she is exactly like Norm. So what is the chance of hiring somebody like Norm over somebody like Norma? So if we take the stats from the Harvard Business Review, if we have 3 Norms and a Norma, the chance of hiring a Norm by ratio should be 75%. But we know the actual chance of hiring a Norm is 100%. So this means that every Norm, instead of having a 25% chance of being hired, has a 33% chance of being hired. If we have 3 Normas and a Norm, we expect Norm to have a 25% chance of being hired. He's 1 in 4. 1 in 4 candidates, that's a fair chance. In fact, the actual chance of hiring Norm is 33%. So Norm's chances of being hired don't matter at all, because we're far more likely to hire Norm than a Norma. As we've just shown, you are far more likely to hire somebody like Norm than Norma, and the difference is one thing. So what about when we start to look at more than just one difference? What about other differences? What about those other pieces that I was talking about? So this is something that comes from queer theory, and it's called intersectionality, which actually came from something called critical race theory. Kimberly Crenshaw developed it in 1989, and there's a very good explainer from Vice.com, and it's about the layering of identities. So let's think about these intersections or layers of difference. So here is Norm, nicely at the centre of all of these different axes of difference. Gender, sexuality, middle classness, going to university, neuronormativity, all of those things. Norm is safely in the middle. And there's these rings around, and each ring is like one difference out. So here we have Norm and Norma. Norma is one difference out from Norm on the gender, and yet we know that you're far more likely to hire Norm than Norma. Here's Ahmed. Ahmed is one difference out from Norm on the race spectrum. Ahmed, in every other way, is exactly like Norm. But again, Norm is more likely to get hired than Ahmed. So what happens if we have somebody like Moiche, who is Ghanaian, hence the name, grew up in this country in every other aspect than 2 things. She is a woman and she is black. In every other aspect, she is like Norm. Norm is still more likely to get hired. So the more differences you have, the further out you get from Norm. So here's me off on the side. I had to kind of squish everything in. We have a habit of hiring norms because they're what we expect. And the reason always given for not hiring somebody like Moiche or Ahmed or Norma will be culture fit. They were a really good candidate, they just might not gel with the team. I'm not sure that the team will be able to handle them. Oh, I know the team are really good, but Moiche might be a little bit too different to fit in. Those kind of thinkings is what this is all about, and it's always that culture fit reason. And it's often said, not that I feel like that because I've done my unconscious bias training and I do understand what's going on, but the team might feel like that. So how do we fix this? How do we get in and actually fix this problem? Well, I don't have the answer. I really don't. I wish I did. I wish I could just turn around and go and be able to say, do this one thing and it'll be fine. What I can do is I can point you at the problem. And then we can work together to figure out a way to solve it. Because I'm not going to be able to solve this. You're not going to be able to solve this alone. We can work together and figure out how to solve this. This isn't an elephant in the room problem. This isn't, the room is fine. There's an elephant that we need to sort out and recognize and all of those things. We've all done our unconscious bias training. We all work very hard on our D&I and tracking our numbers and things like that. The problem is the room that's built. The problem is the structure that we all work within. The problem is that when we think of normal, when we think of what's the average, we think of norm. So think about what your team's ideas of normal are. Challenge them. Ask them when they talk about, oh, we want another Bob. Does Bob look just like Norm? What do they, and if they say something like that, that's shrinking down their view of what normal is. And when somebody says a person won't be hired because of culture fit, challenge those statements. Make them justify why somebody won't fit in. Is it about their experience? Is it about the way that they were in the interview? And be aware of when somebody says something in the interview. A man is assertive, a woman is aggressive, and a black woman is doubly aggressive. I found her very aggressive. Did you? Or was she just as assertive as Norm would be? But you've got this culture bias that plays on top of it. So challenge anything that says culture fit. Challenge when people say, I'm not sure that they will fit in with the team. Understand what they mean by that. And hire them. Hire those people of difference. Give them the chance. And when after 12 or 18 months, somebody says, well, Moiche hasn't quite gelling with the team, ask them why the norms aren't letting them in. Ask them what's going on. Is it one Moiche and a team of norms? Then change the team. Make the team more inclusive. Hire more inclusiveness. Hire more difference. But hire them. Give them a chance. It makes such a difference, and they will change what you think of as normal. And you'll start talking about, well, we need a team with Moiches and Ahmeds and Normas and Jays in them. And that means that our normal becomes much more inclusive, much bigger, and we hire different types of people. So hire them. Because being visibly different costs. It costs some of us our careers, it costs us jobs, it costs us stability, it just costs over and over and over. When you get a look at my CV, which is up on LinkedIn, and you're welcome to have a look, you'll see that I have not spent very long in many jobs. I've been through a lot of short-term jobs. In fact, being in a job for 4 years is quite a remarkable achievement for me. And this is about being that visibly different person and its cost. But if we are not visible, we cannot demand that the world make space for us. Now, despite this statement, I am not a demanding person. I'm challenging, I'm not demanding. I would like to challenge you. I'd like to challenge you to think about what you think of when you think of normal for a team. And I'd like you to challenge your team when they come back and say, great candidate, just not a culture fit. So thank you for listening. I'm hoping to stay around for about 10 minutes to do some Q&As. You're welcome to ask me anything. You may not get the answer that you expect. I'm Dr. J. Harrison. I gave myself the job title Harbinger of Change because ThoughtWorks, where I work, allowed me to create my own job title. My Twitter is Dr. J. Harrison, and I'm DRJ Harrison at ThoughtWorks is my email address. I'm a service designer / business analyst, and I've also been the candidate your teams have never and probably will never hire.